Women to Women National Conversations Tour, our series, Let's Really Talk About It. Before we start the presentation and the conversation, there are a few housekeeping issues that I'd like to remind you of. If you look in your chat box and you have a question that you'd like to submit to one of our panelists, please do so, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. For future reference, this conversation will be available this afternoon on our website, which is www.tour.com, as well as on our social media handles. So please share with your friends and let's continue the conversation. So as we get started, I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Chamberlain. She's the president and founder of the Women to Women National Conversations Tour. Sarah?
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Cecilia, for making this all happen. We really appreciate it. And ladies, thank you for joining us this morning. I really pray your families are safe and healthy during this really amazing, unprecedented time. We are encouraged that our country is hopefully returning back to some type of new normal. A lot of the states are lifting. We're not here in DC lifting yet, but a lot of states are around the country. And Sharon gave you a little overview of the Women to Women National Conversations Tour, but we travel the country talking and having frank conversations about issues that are important to all of you. We've had the pleasure of meeting many of you. We hope to get back on tour face-to-face in the fall. But in the meantime, as Sharon said, please go to our website, www.tour.com. Share your ideas, share your concerns, listen to what we've done in the past, share your ideas. We're working on a mental health webcast that we're going to have in a couple weeks as well. So it's important for us to meet with all of you because our motto here is you tell us, we tell Washington. So what you tell us goes back to the elected officials here in DC. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's panelists, which are just amazing women. I've had the great honor of calling friends. Today we're joined by HR former panelists and experts, Amy Bakay, who's of NOLA, and Emily Dickens of Society for Human Resource Management. These women are voices, everything there is to do about work they know. I want to thank you both for doing this. I could run through your resume, but I won't because you guys can introduce yourselves much better than I can. So Amy, we're going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Sharon, for having us here, and thank you, Sarah, as well. I am Amy Bakay. I own a firm based out of New Orleans, Louisiana called SHRM-SCP. We have offices in San Antonio, Texas. We're an HR consulting and outplacement firm for small businesses across the country, servicing hundreds of small businesses with employee counts of under 500. I'm an instructor at Tulane Law School where I actually teach about HR, and I'm a lifetime SHRM member. Some call me a self-described HR guru. So all things HR, that's me and that's my team. And so we are, like Emily said when we opened earlier today, we are all working remotely and working very diligently to help small businesses reopen at a steady pace. And of course, HR is on the front lines right now, working with both essential and non-essential businesses to weather through this storm. So I'm happy to be here today and talk through all things HR.
Thank you, Amy. Emily, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, ladies. I'm Emily Dickens. I am the Chief of Staff and Head of Government Affairs for the Society for Human Resource Management, as most of you know, SHRM. And I'd like to say I'm an executive who has the honor of working each day on issues relevant to workers and workplace, and serving our over 300,000 members of SHRM who are residing in over 165 countries. My government affairs team has spent a lot of time over the last few weeks monitoring what is coming out of Congress and actually monitoring what's coming out of the states in terms of issues and new laws and policies that will impact the workplace of today and the next phase of the workplace. I won't say the new normal, I'll say the next normal of the workplace. And it's been an honor for SHRM to partner this year with the Women to Women Tour in honor of the centennial of the 19th and of the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. So thank you for having me again.
Thank you, Emily. So my first question is going to go to Emily, actually, and then Amy, I'd like both of you to answer it. With the country gradually reopening the workplace, how are companies dealing with the fears of employees that are timid about returning to the workplace too soon? And are there disciplinary repercussions of that? So Emily?
Wow, that's a big one to start
There
off.
you go. We're starting hard here.
So SHRM research has found that employers are struggling to make this adjustment to 100% remote work, right? For a number of reasons. It could be they didn't have the technology, but I'll tell you one really big reason is that it's really hard once you've built a culture around a certain set of circumstances to rapidly deploy everything you need to maintain that culture. And for HR professionals, that's been making sure you keep employees engaged. And as much as we try to do to keep people engaged and in the teamwork frame of mind and focus on the work, you don't know what's going on in their homes. You don't know how they're personally being impacted by this public health crisis. And so it's been difficult. And employers are being understanding, but we also can't stop evaluating performance during these times because you have to keep the business running. As we all said, you know, this is Johnny, my CEO, Johnny was on a call last week with a number of global leaders, right? And this is a balance between lives and livelihoods. We thought that that was something really profound. We need our businesses, we need work to continue so that people can continue making a livelihood, and we must keep their health at the forefront of what we do for them, which is focusing on their lives. But people also have to understand that in order to keep the business running, you've got to perform. And that means if you have mental health issues, I'm sure we'll talk about that, that are precluding you from performing, reaching out so that you can get EAP services, and things of that nature. So I'll say it's really hard for employers right now to maintain that balance. And then the other issues, you're finding this expectation of people being able to continue to work from home for forever, right? Because you're hearing some major companies say, oh, we'll do it. I think Twitter just said this morning, you know, can work from home as long as you want to, right? That doesn't work for every company. And our research is finding that employers expect work from home rates to eventually return to less than 5%.
Wow. Amy, what's your perspective on the question?
Well, I agree with everything she says, in particular on the cultural implications as well. You know, one of the part of the question that you asked about the, you know, the uneasiness of some people returning and is there a disciplinary process involved in that? And I agree, you know, being an advocate for performance over presence is really necessary. And while we've all been very flexible, there's certainly jobs that still have to be done and expectations that have to be met. You know, one of the things we're advocating for, and I know SHRM does as well, is assigning a return to work task force or return to the, as Emily says, the next normal, which I really like. Having a task force oversee that so that it is not a one size fits all or one size fits most, but it's very unique, and this has to be done in phases. It's not going to be easy. And as we all know, people have different personal situations. So having someone in particular, HR assigned to that task force is going to help maintain confidentiality and privacy, because you are going to have those employees that say, well, I have this situation and that's why I am unable. And that could be confidential information that shouldn't be shared with, you know, maybe your office manager or someone who is not in practice of receiving that type of information, and ensuring that, you know, while we're being very fair, we're also being very firm. And as Emily said, not everyone can be Twitter, so not everyone can continue to work from home, although that might be an easier accommodation going forward for a lot of people in industries. But, you know, there are some, like my hospitality clients, they can't allow everyone to work from home. So there's got to be phases. There has to be people overseeing this phased reentry. and then someone also still holding people accountable for ensuring that the job requirements are being met. That's very critical.
So that kind of leads into the next question. And this one, I could have asked you this question. I did. It came from someone else. But what the question is my staff has commented that working from home, they're working longer hours. Oh yeah, so am I. They're more productive, and there are less interruptions. Are you finding, Amy, that that's the same sentiment from people that you're hearing from?
That's interesting, because I would say for most of the small businesses that I'm working with today, that's split. And I would say that's split even for my own team of employees, where the lines do tend to be blurred today. And I say it's split because you might have some employees that start working very early and don't really know how to shut that off. And it's difficult to find that balance because they're committing so much time to work. And that's a nice luxury to have these days, is to be able to have work and be able to do that productively from home. But the other part is what I like to call I refer to it as the lions and tigers and bears in your household. And that would be your spouses, pets, and children. It's hard to stay clear of the lions and tigers and bears in your household. And that balance is more difficult because as we look at what the workforce will look like in the future, in the next few months with our lions and tigers and bears at home with us, we may not be as productive as we were before. So, the balance is going to be difficult, but it's going to need to be redefined often. And that's what I keep saying. It might be, hey, for the month of May, we're going to work this way, and here's the expectations. But in June, we're going to redefine what that looks like. And as long as it's communicated clearly, then I think that will help. Employers can help their employees find that balance.
Great. Thank you, Amy. And it's funny, I've never heard them refer to that, but that's very true. As my Yorkie will start to bark, I'm like, oh no, go away, please. Good Lord. So Emily, the next question's for you. As we maybe go to more teleworking, do companies need to restructure their compensation packages?
So that's so funny. I thought about this last night, right? And there are so many different ways to structure compensation. And I thought about this for a whole other reason. So let me say that. All right. There are so many different ways to structure compensation. I'm going to tell you, I am not an expert on compensation of really good comp people. But I'll say this, my boss tells me all the time, I don't speak enough about women and the special issues related to them in compensation. And the advice I would give to people in general thinking about compensation, it is much more than the salary. And teleworking could be considered a part of a compensation package if a company thinks that's something to add. It's very similar to the other items that are part of a compensation package, right? So that's salary plus retirement plus pension plus long-term incentive plans, healthcare benefits. At SHRM, that would be open leave, transportation, and bonuses. So a company could decide as they begin to model their compensation packages that teleworking would be added to that package as an option. And if so, that could impact what the salary looks like. And so as the person considering the package upon hire, they'll have to decide what is important to them. I will never forget getting a job offer for a job where my base salary was only going to be $5,000 more than what I was making. And I kept going back and forth about it. And my husband said, but your opportunity for bonus is 10 times that. And are you going to bet on yourself? And so I think when you look at compensation, you've got to look at it holistically, and companies have to do the same thing. And they may decide to make it part of the package, and it could impact what the base salary is.
Good. Thank you, Emily. Amy, this next one is for you. I am currently teleworking, and I think our overall company morale has gone down. How do we encourage each other?
That's a good one. I feel like in the beginning, when we all transitioned to working from home, it was like ripping the Band-Aid off, right? In the first few weeks is, yoga pants and coffee and what are we going to do today? And then after a few weeks, it's like, okay, we're going to be here a while. I haven't talked to this person in a while. And I haven't grabbed a coffee with this person. And if you are not in regular communication with your peers, with your leadership team, or if you are on the leadership team with your staff, then you're going to lose touch. You're going to lose that engagement factor. And if you're losing the engagement factor as a leader, imagine how your staff is feeling when they can't pop over to the cubicle next door and ask about the weekend. And those things are still really important. And I know we'll talk about mental health as well, but that engagement factor and the morale factor for your team is still really critical and necessary for you to be able to drive your business forward. We found in the beginning that we were almost over communicating. So if someone recommended a platform, we were going to try it. And we finally, I think it was probably a month ago, we reached our breaking point, and I threw in the towel and said, I can't. I've got to get out of Slack and House Party and Microsoft Teams chat. And, I've got to walk away for just a moment because it was too much. I think it's important to find a proper balance for how much communication and how togetherness you want. But I do think it's important for leadership to drive that, whether it's daily or weekly huddles, to stay in contact, but from a peer-to-peer perspective, offering support to one another. So I go back to the lions and tigers and bears. If those are really bringing productivity down for one particular person on the team, recognizing that and offering, if you don't have those distractions in your home, to offer a lending hand. There are platforms out there that do make it easier. So if you want to, work with a software like Donut or something like that, you can, hey, let's have a virtual coffee together Wednesday morning and do a quick check-in. There's virtual happy hours. We're doing those very often. I ordered lunch for the team last Friday. So after a typical meeting, everyone, got pizza delivered. And that was really nice for us to just kind of take a break from talking about work and just talk about life. So I think it needs to be intentional and just finding the right balance so that it's not too much, but it's also just not, okay, out of sight, out of mind, they'll figure it out. I think it's really important for it to be intentional.
And Sharon, I'm sorry, Sarah, can I add this?
Sure.
I think I want to also share, I know we have a number of women who are at different places in their careers on the phone. So I would say from the CEO perspective, she just mentioned she ordered pizza for her team. One of the things we did was we did an all hands call. So that's over 400, all our employees on a call. And typically when we do an all hands meeting at headquarters, right afterwards, we serve a hot lunch. I have a boss who's really particular about hot lunch. So because we couldn't do it that day, he actually sits on the board with someone who sits on the board of Domino's, had a discussion with them, and every employee got a Domino's delivery right after that all hands call. And even our employees in India, those who didn't have a Domino's near them, they got a food voucher for a local place. So that was very important to see the CEO of the company taking that level of interest in doing something direct. And it wasn't just, I'm gonna send you a pizza. It is, I acknowledge you got other people in the house with you, so you can get up to 2 pizzas with your order, or maybe a pizza and a salad to accommodate. It was even something that small, recognizing that you may not be home alone. So that's one. As a member of the leadership team, I actually chair our crisis team. And as chief of staff, I'm always trying to connect with people, especially the ones that don't report directly to me. I walk around the office a lot and just do drop-ins. And so I asked my EA to schedule for me 10-minute drop-ins via Slack with people who don't report to me. So it's just like me walking the halls, but I'm just checking in, getting a look at them, asking them how their home and situation is. And for one person, she said, can I ask you a question? I want to go back in the office and get my mouse. It's much easier for me to work with with a larger mouse than the one I have here. And it was so easy to say to her, just call IT, have them order one and ship it to your house, right? So that allows you to solve a minor problem. And then I would say for peers, what I asked my team to do is, if you knew that a member of our team lived alone and was by themselves, that you'd schedule virtual coffees with them. You call and check on them. I've got one team member, she and I are both from Queens, New York, so we talk about home and the fact that our parents are there and New York's been hard hit, but we also watch 90 Day Fiance, so we text back and forth about Big Ed every time there's an issue. So I think it's important to find things that get people's minds off of work, but also to show that you care about what their situation is and to just try to create experiences for them during this time.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Very good.
Emily,
Great idea.
Emily, let me just comment on that. We all love Big Ed.
So next question, and I found this with my daughter's school. She's downstairs in school. And the teachers, not all of them are young, and to be honest, I've even had some issues with this. So this question is, I own a small IT company with 18 employees. Some of my employees are older and not very technologically advanced. I have found they are not successful at teleworking, and I'm afraid that if I lay them off, I will face discrimination or HR problems. Any advice? And Emily, this question's for you.
So in general, employers can lay off and terminate employees for job-related reasons, such as not meeting criteria for use of technology. Now, if there are only older workers, though, there may be a perception of age discrimination. So before making that decision, you want to consider the following. What are the requirements for the role? Is the use of technology essential? Did those employees meet the criteria while working on site? And if not, did you discuss that with them and document it during their performance evaluation periods? Is teleworking required for the role? Are you being consistent in your practices? Are there other employees who are not older and equally technologically challenged? And I'll just tell you a personal story. I've met so many people who are not older who cannot use Excel. And I'm one of those people that lives by Excel. So you want to think about those things as well. And if employees were to file claims of age discrimination, would you be able to defend your actions and show that they were let go for job-related reasons and they were treated similar to other employees with similar issues? So I say the bottom line, Sarah, is that there's always a risk when terminating employees, but ensuring they're following your own policies and practices and making decisions based on job-related reasons, you should be able to minimize the risk. And you may want to consult your legal counsel to understand the additional risks in that particular situation.
Thank you, Emily. Amy, this next one's for you. How would you successfully handle HR grievances during this time?
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, those don't go away. Actually, I was just saying a few weeks ago, wow, maybe we'll see a decrease in harassment complaints. And I might have spoken too soon. We actually got a phone call this week, early one morning, that someone needed us to come in and investigate a harassment complaint. And yeah, so that those traditional HR grievances from the traditional workforce pre-COVID are still out there and they still exist, but it's more of a, okay, how do we handle them now, right? So whether that is a more traditional route where you want to do that intake and work through the logistics of that in person, which we're doing, right? I mean, the new requirements being that if that's a better face-to-face, or should I say mask-to-mask conversation, it's ensuring that, everyone's adhering to social distancing and there's plenty of space to conduct the conversation, that there's proper PPE in place. But more often these days, it's really making sure that people know who to call and why to call. If your policies and procedures have changed, then have those been properly communicated to your teams? And if they haven't, do your teams know how to get in touch with their HR representative? And how are you going to conduct that type of intake? Again, is it in person or is it via Zoom or some type of video call? Oftentimes those conversations can be very delicate and sensitive. And maybe even a phone call without video would be more comfortable for people. But I think also for HR grievances, the new umbrella falls under possible the employer requirements for their particular city. So if your city is now open at 25% and you have this type of business and you have these requirements in your jurisdiction, and employees see that as an employer not following that, how are you as HR, in particular, if you're on the task force, how are you going to receive those types of complaints? What are you going to do with it? I think that's pretty important as well. So the traditional grievances have not gone away. We just now have new ones to deal with under COVID. And it really depends on how your culture was established prior and what's going to work best during this perhaps, teleworking remote life that we live in, and how you're going to handle those and then do the proper remedy that goes along with that. And so, I don't know, Emily, do you have anything to add on that?
I think you got it right there. The only thing I would say, we talk a lot about culture. I think you know this, Amy. It's a big thing for us at SHRM. And, if you've got a good culture going into a public health crisis like this, you still gotta know that there will be some bad actors, and you still, in order to maintain that good culture, you have to hold them accountable during a crisis like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Amy, this question goes back to kind of what you said. This person who sent it has an employee who's not prompt for virtual meetings or misses them altogether. How do you discipline them?
Yeah, so again, going back to the setting the expectations and whether that's weekly or monthly, again, when we first started, it was ripping the Band-Aid off and it's, oh, let's deal with this. And then after we realized, oh, we're going to be permanently working from home, what are the new expectations? And managing performance and not presence. And so the first time that happened, it was a great opportunity to have a conversation to better understand why did that happen? Has there ever been any gaps in performance prior to this? And why were you late? And is there anything I can do to ensure that you're not late the next time? Being sure that they have the proper equipment and technology that they need. And then obviously that is really spelling out expectations. So I expect you to be on the call early. So if that is dialing in 10 minutes early to ensure that audio is working and you are camera ready, ready to go right at the start. This is, during this pandemic, is not a time to let the little things build up to a big thing. And so as soon as there's a performance inefficiency, that is the moment to have that verbal conversation with someone to level set and make sure expectations are made clear.
Thank you, Amy. So this question, I'm afraid, is going to be a huge problem as we reopen our doors and go out in the world. So Amy, I'm going to have you answer it first, and Emily, I would love your input as well. Research has shown that the pandemic can cause serious mental anguish. Do you have any suggestion for employers and how to assist their employees?
Yeah, I think there's never been a more important time for employers to have a good EAP and employee assistance provider on hand, and to ensure that their health plans have a mental health component. I think most providers today have some type of telemed or teledoc component to it, and ensuring that your covered employees are aware of what their benefits are, checking in with them often to ensure that they are not just physically ready, but we talk a lot in my organization about being mentally prepared for all phases, right? And some people might take a little bit longer than others to get mentally prepared, and having, again, that task force, that person who can respect privacy and confidentiality, to check in with that employee to see if there is more support items needed and more resources needed for their mental health. And those one-on-one conversations that leadership can have with employees to better gauge if they are mentally preparing to return, and if assistance is needed going outside of the traditional, oh, here, call this toll-free number, but actually going the extra step and lining up the care if necessary. A lot of behavioral therapists in the Louisiana area are now operating virtually and have discounted their sessions a great deal, in particular for some of the industries that have been harder hit, like hospitality. And so if an employer can cover that expense and make that session very easy for the employee, they're more likely to take advantage of that.
Thank you, Amy. Emily?
So I will say, Amy, that was great. I will say, from the leadership perspective, I'd share our crisis team. So one of the things I've tried to do is share with people that I understand this is a lot on everyone, and be vulnerable if you can as a leader, and let them know why it's a lot on you. A lot of people know at SHRM that my mom is a widow who lives in New York City. And so the whole idea of what's going on there and how it's worse there than other places, right? Sharing with people how she's doing, and that is something that I can't control. My sister's helping her, but people should understand, and try to share with people your perspective, so they understand they're not in it alone, and they understand that as you're making decisions for the organization, you have some idea that this is not easy as well, right? And so I think leaders have to be a little bit vulnerable, and then share with them some of the things you're doing to cope. So, they may laugh, but my husband and I have completed 3 jigsaw puzzles, right? And
we just that too. Yeah.
And we just ordered one where you've got to complete the crossword puzzle before you do the jigsaw puzzle, right? I ordered a Mickey Mouse coloring book and some crayons, right? You've got to, share with people what you're doing, because hopefully they'll see that as a tip, and that might be something to relieve their stress. But then seriously, again, from the leadership perspective, you have to communicate and almost over communicate. People are fearful about losing their livelihood, and they're also fearful about their lives. I said again, this is a crisis about lives and livelihoods. You've got to address both things when you are addressing your people about what's going on with the organization. And so the thing that you can do as a leader to try to help them is not create an additional problem or try to allay what they're feeling about having their jobs. And so tell them every step what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what is going to happen next, the good and the bad, right? And help them feel confident that that scenario, any type of scenario they can be thinking about, has been accounted for. We had to cancel our annual conference. It's the largest event that we put on, 24,000 people. We were all supposed to be in San Diego. It makes up a huge percentage of our budget. But what was important to us was to convey the people that we had insurance for communicable diseases. We had that rider, which a lot of organizations didn't have, right? And was to talk about that we're trying to look at all of our options, because they understand that us not being able to have that event does impact them and what they could potentially bring home at the end of the year as it relates to bonuses, and also our ability to maintain employees there. So it was just important to share with them every step of the way that we could, our strategy as it related to why we may wait till this minute to cancel, or why we had to ultimately cancel. So be as transparent as you can be. I understand, there are some things you just can't share, but if you can be more transparent with people, it can help allay some of those concerns.
Thank you, Emily. And ladies, this has been an amazing conversation, and I appreciate this. And before we open it up to the many questions that are out there, I have a final question. And Emily, I'll start with you, and then Amy. What do you think the new workplace and workforce will look like?
Well, I just said it's the next workplace. It's not the new workplace, right? Because we know that anything can happen. We didn't expect this. And so we've always got to be prepared for unforeseen circumstances and the unexpected. So I would say to people, we have to all be flexible and agile and understand that this may not be for long. And that means making sure that we keep ourselves as skilled as possible, and that we understand that we may have to change duties, and that there will be some change, and we have to learn how to flow with it, how to just keep it moving. And then the other thing I'll say, more practical, well, not more practical, but if you think about our offices and our office space, because there's been so much discussion about teleworking, offices are not going to become obsolete. They're going to look different. And so instead of all this open space concept for collaboration and technology, there are people who really want to get back to work. And in order to do that, we're going to see more offices and less shared workspaces. We're killing the open floor plans. There's tons of opportunity for architects. They're thinking about other ways to make it so people will have their own space, but still be able to work collaboratively. So but this just happened in the last 2 months. And so we shouldn't pretend to know for certain that this change is inevitable or permanent. HR needs to continue to be flexible and to react to employee needs as workplaces reopen.
Thank you. So Amy, same question. What do you think the next workplace and workforce will look like?
Yeah, I think Emily's right, and we use that word agile a great deal. I think we played out pivot the last few weeks, and so we look at being more agile and adaptable and flexible. I agree on the physical space changes. We went through that open floor, open concept, and we went through shared office space, and I think there's definitely going to be some changes in the physical space as it relates to closeness. And one thing I think this has taught us is that going forward, we do have to collaborate and communicate more. That's definitely critical. And understanding that should something like this happen again in the future, which is very likely, or even something similar, say a hurricane, weathering that type of storm, ensuring that you prepare now so that the next storm that you have to weather, you have the right technology in place, you have the right team in place, and ensuring that you're ready for all of that. I think that being agile, being adaptable, being open to changing your physical space and how we work. I do think about, really quickly, I thought about this the other day. When we started as a society thinking about going paperless for payroll and HR materials, it was unheard of years ago and very scary to think, oh no, we're not going to have our physical paper. But then over time, we adapted to that, and now it's become a norm. It's very common to have a paperless payroll and HR process. And so if you think about just that change and how we can adapt our minds to think, oh, this is an easier and better way to do this, and it actually prepares us for the next type of storm that we have to weather, being open to those types of things, I think is what the next workforce is going to look like.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Cecilia, I know there's lots of questions out there. Could you go ahead and start asking the women?
Yes, our first one is, do you think that competition for talent is going to heighten with companies as they now have the potential to hire away furloughed employees?
This is Amy. I can take that. And I think Emily touched on the compensation piece before. And when I think about compensation, I think more as a total reward and not just the actual dollar figure. There is some strategy going on right now, just trying to return people to work who might be potentially receiving more on unemployment currently than they would be returning back to their regular job. And so what type of total reward system would you need to build to attract that type of talent? Certainly the competition, it is an employer's market. There's certainly a whole lot more people out there looking for jobs that are available rather than there were just 2 or 3 months ago. And so I think designing the right type of compensation is going to be important, whether or not that's a dollar figure, but what makes a difference to a particular employee. So if you were paying $15 an hour before, and this person won't take $15 an hour now, but rather also might consider some type of flexible work or some type of PTO adaption. There are other things, other incentives, bonus incentives and commissions that you could put in place to attract people. So I think that employers might have to redesign the total rewards, but there's certainly going to be a lot more talented people in the market than before. So it's an employer's world, I believe, going forward. Emily, do you have anything to add to that?
Absolutely agree. And you know, as this is women to women, I can't tell you enough, you've got to be very open as you're out here competing for opportunities, and very flexible and agile, and also think outside of your normal box in terms of what that experience could do for you and how you can leverage it in your future. So it may not be everything you want at that moment, but bet on yourself and what you could do for that opportunity, because there's someone else who will say yes immediately and not try to haggle and have very similar talents. So I would just say, make sure you're very thoughtful in your processes as you're trying to get a new job, as you're trying to be promoted, and even as you are sitting in your current job. Are you truly a team player? Are you truly there to make a difference for your employees? And are you doing what you're doing as an employee? Are you working so that your boss can work well? Remember, your boss has the ultimate responsibility for that division, and how that boss works is going to be critical to the success of your division. So are you adapting yourself to the needs of your boss, or always expecting your boss to adapt to your needs? And we probably need to think about that, because now they have more flexibility to find the talent that works for them.
Excellent. Our next question, do you think that this crisis will result in women feeling that they can't do it all as childcare and school issues continue? Do you think more may opt out of working altogether?
This is Amy. I would say, you know, we as an organization discussed this in the very beginning when schools and daycare started closing, and, you know, wondering out loud if those traditional gender roles would take a hold, right? And so when offices begin to reopen and both parents have been working from home, but the children have nowhere to go, how do you decide who's going to return back to work, right? And is that, the mom or the dad, or in some cases both, if you're able, and whether or not that's split. But I have seen a shift already where those traditional gender roles are coming back into play. And as an employer, if you are looking at the requirements of a position, if that job requirement is to be on site, and you can't offer that position as a remote position, then that's going to complicate matters. And so I do see a shift happening. I think time will tell, right, whether or not it happens altogether. But obviously, you already see that more women are able to work from home and still care for children in those roles. But as it goes forward in the future, I think it's too early really to tell. Emily, do you have anything that you want to add on that?
So I just, I keep seeing these, that work-life balance, terminology coming up. And before all of this, at SHRM, we always talked about work-life integration. Our CEO is a single dad of a 9-year-old girl who, and does not have a nanny, right? He's it. And he has figured out a way to integrate her, and he comes into the office, right? So I look at him as a great example of work-life integration. Sometimes his daughter has to, get picked up from school and spend the hours of 3 to 5 in the office. And we've seen that with other people as well. And so what I ask us all to do is to really take some time and think about how you've integrated your work into your life prior to this, and maybe how you do a better job of that integration. There are always going to be times where you're going to have to make a critical decision between what you have to do for work and what you're doing in your personal life. And I think first starting with acknowledging that there is no balance, and that you've got to figure out a way to make those two things integrate so that it works for you. And if you're talented, if you've got the skills, you can find a culture or an environment that works for your work-life integration. And that's critically important.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the acceptance of flexible work will provide women a stronger voice in asking for flexible arrangements in the future as we move forward?
Yeah, I think that it's certainly going to make it easier. We've seen that more and more positions were able to, and I go back to that ripping the Band-Aid off, right? Where it was a little scary before, maybe not everyone bought into the concept. And what this has really proven is, and I know that SHRM had a poll recently, and I'll let Emily speak to that, but I was just reading the other day a Forbes article that talked about how, I think 30% of the companies they polled said they will allow teleworking at least 2 to 3 days per week going forward. And so I do think it puts parents in a better position, and in particular women, to go in if that is a part of the total rewards package that they need to say, this is the type of position I'm seeking. Do I have this flexibility to work these type of hours? And as long as the job requirements are being met, I think more employers are open to the idea, whereas they were not so much just 3 or 4 months ago.
So I think I'll just add that I think employers will be more upfront about what the position requirements are, so that there's no question. So I think Amy knows we've been telling people to, look at a job description, and does it really require a BA? Right? And we've been challenging that through our work with the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. And we'll say the same thing to our members. Look at the job description. Does it require the person to be in the office? And if it doesn't, put that information in there. Say that teleworking is available, right? It can lure some of the top talent that you weren't thinking about. If your office is in DC, but this top talent is in California, it could really lure that type of person. And so I think more employers are going to put that in the job descriptions, so it's clear out the outset, and therefore not requiring people to have to ask for that particular accommodation, right? If you know in advance what the requirements are, it'll make it easy all around.
Yeah, I agree, Emily. I think redefining the role is going to be important as people start returning to the next normal. So maybe the job has changed over the last few months. And you're right, if you do redefine the role and publish new requirements, then it may not put someone in a position to have to ask for it when it's just a given on the front end.
So ladies, I want to thank you. I know there's many more questions and we could go on for much longer, but we promised you 45 minutes and I want to stick to that. So Amy and Emily, we really appreciate your time today. It's been very informative. And for all of you who have listened and been part of this, please follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And please note that next week we have another one and we'd love to have you join us. So Emily and Amy, have a wonderful rest of your day. And ladies, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.